The emergency sirens pierced through the Nevada desert air as Captain Sarah Chen fought to maintain control of her F-35 Lightning II at 35,000 feet. Both her primary and backup navigation systems had failed simultaneously, her heads-up display flickered with static, and a sandstorm below had reduced ground visibility to absolute zero. What happened next would silence every critic who had ever questioned whether she belonged among America's elite fighter pilots. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But this moment of truth didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of months of doubt, ridicule, and a systematic campaign to prove that some people simply didn't deserve to fly the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. The morning sun cast long shadows across Nellis Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Chen stepped off the transport aircraft that had brought her from her previous assignment at a small training facility in Montana. Around her, 11 other pilots gathered their gear with the easy confidence of aviators who had been preparing for this moment their entire careers. The F-35 Lightning II advanced training program at Nellis represented the pinnacle of military aviation, and every pilot present had fought tooth and nail for the privilege of being there. Sarah adjusted her flight bag and looked across the tarmac, where 6 gleaming F-35s sat in perfect formation, their stealth profiles cutting sharp lines against the desert backdrop. These weren't training aircraft or simulators. These were operational fighters worth more than most people would earn in multiple lifetimes, and learning to master them would separate the competent pilots from the truly exceptional ones. The other pilots moved with a swagger that came from years of flying high-performance aircraft at prestigious assignments. Their flight suits bore patches from elite squadrons, advanced training schools, and overseas deployments that read like a who's who of military aviation excellence. They spoke in the casual shorthand of experienced aviators, referencing aircraft specifications and tactical procedures with the fluency that comes from extensive operational experience. Sarah's flight suit, by contrast, told a decidedly different story. Her previous assignment patch showed a small training base in rural Montana, where she had spent 2 years teaching basic flight principles to newly commissioned officers. Her overseas deployment history consisted of a single 6-month rotation to a logistics hub in Germany, where she had flown cargo missions and routine transport flights. On paper, her qualifications met the minimum requirements for F-35 training, but barely. The whispers started almost immediately. As the group moved toward the briefing facility, conversations quieted when Sarah passed, then resumed in hushed tones once she was out of earshot. She caught fragments of speculation about how she had managed to secure a slot in such a competitive program, questions about whether standards had been lowered to ensure diverse representation, and thinly veiled suggestions that political considerations rather than merit had influenced the selection process. Major Jake Morrison, a tall, broad-shouldered pilot with the kind of confident bearing that suggested he had never doubted his place in any room he entered, emerged as the unofficial leader of the group. His flight suit displayed patches from multiple overseas combat deployments, advanced fighter training programs, and prestigious squadron assignments. When he spoke, others listened, and when he expressed opinions, they carried weight within the group dynamic. Morrison had noticed Sarah's Montana training base patch during their initial introduction and made what he considered a reasonable assessment based on available information. Teaching basic flight principles to new officers wasn't exactly the kind of background that prepared someone for the complexities of operating the world's most advanced multi-role fighter. The F-35 program required pilots who could handle split-second decisions in high-threat environments, manage multiple weapon systems simultaneously, and execute complex tactical maneuvers while processing enormous amounts of information from advanced sensor packages. During the welcome briefing, Colonel Marcus Webb, the program director, outlined the challenging curriculum that lay ahead. The F-35 wasn't just another fighter aircraft. It was a technological marvel that required pilots to function as much as systems managers as traditional aviators. The training would be intensive, unforgiving, and designed to push every pilot to their absolute limits. Those who couldn't adapt to the aircraft's unique characteristics and operational requirements would be eliminated from the program regardless of their previous experience or reputation. As Colonel Webb spoke about the standards and expectations, Sarah noticed several pilots glancing in her direction with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. She understood their perspective. On the surface, her background seemed inconsistent with the high-performance environment they were entering. Teaching basic aviation to new officers in Montana didn't exactly scream tactical fighter expertise. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who had been flying F-16s in combat operations over the Middle East for the past 3 years, leaned over to Morrison during a break in the briefing. "How do you think someone goes from teaching student pilots in Montana to F-35 training?" she whispered. "That's quite a jump in complexity." Morrison shrugged, but his expression suggested he had been wondering the same thing. "Maybe they needed to fill diversity quotas," he replied quietly. "The Air Force has been under pressure to increase female representation in fighter programs." The comment wasn't necessarily intended to be malicious, but it carried an implication that Sarah's presence might be based on factors other than pure aviation merit. In the highly competitive world of military aviation, where every pilot had fought for their position based on demonstrated excellence, the suggestion that someone might have received special consideration struck at the heart of professional pride and institutional integrity. Captain David Park, whose background included test pilot school and experimental aircraft programs, overheard the conversation and nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure she's qualified," he said diplomatically, "but this program is going to be intense. Everyone needs to pull their weight." The subtext was clear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah would need to prove herself quickly, and any struggles or difficulties would be attributed to her unconventional background rather than the inherent challenges of mastering such complex technology. She was entering the program with a deficit of credibility that her fellow pilots didn't face, and recovering from that disadvantage would require exceptional performance under circumstances where even minor mistakes could be amplified and scrutinized. After the briefing, as pilots gathered their materials and prepared for their first aircraft orientation session, Sarah approached the F-35 assigned to her training program. The aircraft was stunning in its technological sophistication, featuring advanced stealth capabilities, sensor fusion technology, and weapons systems that represented decades of cutting-edge research and development. Standing next to it, she felt the weight of responsibility that came with being entrusted to operate such an expensive and strategically important piece of equipment. Captain Brian Foster, whose previous assignment had involved flying air superiority missions over contested airspace, walked over to examine his own assigned aircraft. He glanced at Sarah with polite curiosity tinged with skepticism. "Pretty different from training aircraft, isn't it?" he commented, nodding toward the F-35. "Significantly more complex," Sarah agreed, running her hand along the aircraft's wing edge. "The sensor integration alone represents a completely different approach to situational awareness." Foster raised an eyebrow slightly, surprised by the technical specificity of her response. Most pilots fresh from training assignments would focus on the obvious differences like speed or weapons capability rather than the sophisticated sensor fusion systems that truly set the F-35 apart from previous generation fighters. "Have you had much exposure to advanced avionics packages?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing some of his initial skepticism. "Some," Sarah replied simply, not elaborating on the specifics of her experience. Every aircraft teaches you something different about integrating human decision-making with technological capability. The response was thoughtful and demonstrated an understanding of aviation philosophy that went beyond basic technical knowledge, but it didn't provide the kind of specific background information that would reassure her fellow pilots about her qualifications. If anything, her tendency to speak in general terms, rather than citing specific aircraft or operational experiences, reinforced the impression that her background might be lighter than optimal for such a demanding program. As the afternoon progressed and pilots began their initial familiarization with F-35 systems, the competency gaps became more apparent. Every pilot struggled with the learning curve associated with such advanced technology, but Sarah's questions sometimes revealed unfamiliarity with concepts that others took for granted. When the instructor discussed tactical data link integration, most pilots nodded knowingly, drawing on experience with similar systems in previous aircraft assignments. Sarah listened carefully and asked clarifying questions that suggested she was encountering some of these concepts for the first time. Morrison noticed these moments of uncertainty and filed them away as confirmation of his initial assessment. Teaching new pilots in Montana wouldn't have provided exposure to the kind of advanced networking and sensor fusion technologies that were becoming standard in modern combat aviation. It wasn't necessarily Sarah's fault that her background hadn't prepared her for these complexities, but it did raise legitimate questions about whether she was ready for such an accelerated and demanding training environment. During the evening debrief, pilots gathered informally to discuss their initial impressions and share concerns about the challenging curriculum ahead. The conversation naturally gravitated toward assessments of who might struggle with various aspects of the training and who seemed best prepared for the rigorous standards they would face. "The systems integration is going to be the real challenge," Rodriguez observed. "You need to process information from multiple sources simultaneously while maintaining tactical awareness and executing mission objectives. It's not like anything most of us have done before." "Speak for yourself," Morrison replied with a slight smile. "Those of us with experience in complex threat environments have at least touched on some of these concepts. The real question is whether everyone here has the background to handle the cognitive load." The comment wasn't directed specifically at Sarah, but she felt the implicit criticism nonetheless. Her fellow pilots weren't being deliberately cruel or exclusionary, but they were making natural assessments based on visible qualifications and background indicators. In their world, where competence could mean the difference between life and death, questions about preparation and readiness weren't just academic concerns. Sarah understood their perspective even as it frustrated her. She knew that her unconventional path to the F-35 program raised legitimate questions about her preparation level. What her fellow pilots couldn't know, and what she had chosen not to volunteer during introductions, was that her background contained elements that weren't immediately apparent from her basic service record. The training assignment in Montana had indeed involved teaching basic flight principles to new officers, but it had also included other responsibilities that weren't reflected in standard personnel documentation. Her rotation to Germany had been primarily focused on logistics and transport missions, but it had also involved exposure to classified programs and advanced technology, evaluations that couldn't be discussed in casual conversation. Most importantly, Sarah's educational background included advanced degrees in aeronautical engineering and computer science that she had completed through distance learning programs while maintaining her regular flying duties. Her understanding of aircraft systems and sensor integration wasn't just practical but deeply theoretical, grounded in comprehensive knowledge of the underlying technologies and design principles. But military culture valued demonstrated operational experience over academic credentials, and Sarah's choice to pursue education rather than seeking high-profile flying assignments had left her with qualifications that weren't immediately visible to her peers. She could have corrected their misconceptions by providing more detailed information about her background. But doing so would have seemed defensive and might have created the impression that she was trying to compensate for obvious deficiencies. Instead, she chose to let her performance speak for itself, confident that competence would ultimately be recognized regardless of initial impressions or preconceived notions. It was a principled decision that reflected her confidence in her abilities, but it also ensured that the skepticism surrounding her presence would continue until she had opportunities to demonstrate her actual capabilities under challenging circumstances. As the first week of training progressed, the dynamic between Sarah and her fellow pilots settled into a pattern of polite professionalism tinged with underlying doubt. They weren't openly hostile or deliberately exclusionary, but neither were they fully accepting of her as an equal member of the group. She occupied a provisional status where her right to be in the program was acknowledged but not enthusiastically endorsed. The instructors, led by Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, maintained strict professional standards that didn't allow for favoritism or discrimination based on background or gender. Every pilot was evaluated solely on their performance during training exercises, their grasp of technical concepts, and their ability to demonstrate the kind of decision-making skills that would be essential in operational environments. However, Hayes had also noticed the subtle group dynamics and the way certain pilots seemed to view Sarah's presence with skepticism. As an experienced officer who had navigated her own challenges in male-dominated aviation communities, she understood the additional pressure that Sarah faced to prove herself beyond any reasonable doubt. During a private conversation after the first week's evaluations, Hayes addressed Sarah directly about the social dynamics she had observed. "How are you finding the integration with your fellow pilots?" she asked diplomatically. "Professional and cordial," Sarah replied carefully. "Everyone's focused on the training requirements." Hayes nodded, recognizing the diplomatic non-answer for what it was. "This is a challenging environment for everyone, but I want to make sure you feel supported and able to focus on your learning objectives without unnecessary distractions." "I appreciate that, ma'am. I'm confident that performance will speak for itself as the program progresses." It was exactly the kind of response Hayes had expected, and it reinforced her impression that Sarah possessed the kind of quiet confidence and professional maturity that would serve her well regardless of external pressures. Still, she made a mental note to monitor the group dynamics carefully and intervene if the skepticism evolved into anything more problematic. The second week brought more intensive flight simulation training, where pilots would begin experiencing the F-35's unique handling characteristics and advanced systems in controlled environments before progressing to actual aircraft operations. This phase would provide the first real indicators of who was adapting quickly to the aircraft's requirements and who might struggle with the transition. Sarah approached the simulator training with focused determination, knowing that strong early performance would begin establishing her credibility with both instructors and fellow pilots. The flight simulators at Nellis were among the most advanced in the world, providing completely immersive experiences that replicated every aspect of F-35 operations with extraordinary fidelity. Her first simulation involved basic aircraft handling and systems familiarization, designed to introduce pilots to the F-35's fly-by-wire flight controls and advanced cockpit interfaces. The aircraft's handling characteristics were unlike anything most pilots had experienced, requiring a fundamental shift in thinking about how to interact with flight control systems. As Sarah settled into the simulator cockpit and began working through the startup procedures, she felt a familiar sense of anticipation and focus that came with learning new aircraft systems. The F-35's cockpit was a marvel of technological integration, featuring large touchscreen displays that could be configured for different mission requirements and an advanced helmet-mounted display system that projected critical information directly into the pilot's field of vision. The initial handling exercises went smoothly, with Sarah demonstrating quick adaptation to the aircraft's unique control responses and display configurations. Her technical background served her well in understanding the logical structure of the system interfaces, and her flight experience provided the foundational skills necessary to translate that understanding into practical aircraft control. Morrison, who had completed his simulation session earlier in the day, observed Sarah's session from the monitoring room where instructors and waiting pilots could watch ongoing training exercises. He had performed well during his own simulation, drawing on extensive experience with high-performance aircraft to adapt quickly to the F-35's characteristics. Watching Sarah work through the exercises, Morrison noticed that her responses seemed confident and precise, suggesting better preparation than he had expected based on her background. However, he also noticed that she occasionally consulted her cockpit reference cards more frequently than pilots with extensive fighter experience might need to, reinforcing his impression that she was working harder to compensate for less intuitive familiarity with advanced systems. "She's doing better than I expected," Foster commented from beside Morrison as they watched Sarah execute a series of steep turns and altitude changes. "Basic handling isn't really the test," Morrison replied. "Wait until we get to tactical scenarios and threat management. That's where operational experience really matters." Rodriguez, who had been watching quietly, nodded in agreement. The F-35 is supposed to be easier to fly than previous generation fighters, but it's much harder to employ effectively. The real challenge is learning to process all the sensor information while maintaining tactical awareness. Their assessment was fair and reflected legitimate concerns about the cognitive demands of operating such a sophisticated aircraft in combat environments. The F-35's advanced capabilities were both its greatest strength and its greatest challenge for pilots transitioning from simpler aircraft. Success required not just flying skills, but the ability to function as an information manager and tactical decision maker while maintaining basic aircraft control under high-stress conditions. Sarah completed her simulation session with scores that placed her in the middle of the group rankings, a respectable performance for someone with her background, but not exceptional enough to silence the doubts about her preparation level. The instructors noted her steady progress and professional approach to learning, but they also recognized that she would need to demonstrate significant improvement as the training intensity increased. After the simulation debrief, pilots gathered for their evening academic instruction, covering F-35 tactical employment and mission planning procedures. The classroom sessions were dense with technical information about weapon systems, sensor capabilities, and integration with other aircraft and ground forces. This academic component would test each pilot's ability to absorb and synthesize complex information that would be essential for effective combat operations. Sarah approached the academic training with the same methodical focus she brought to flight operations, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions when concepts weren't immediately clear. Her engineering background provided advantages in understanding the technical aspects of sensor fusion and weapon systems integration, but the tactical employment concepts required learning entirely new frameworks for thinking about air combat operations. During a break in the evening session, Captain Park approached Sarah with what seemed like genuine interest in her perspective on the training challenges. "How are you finding the transition from training aircraft to these advanced systems?" he asked. "Every aircraft teaches you something different," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "The F-35 is obviously much more complex, but the fundamental principles of aviation still apply. It's just a matter of learning to integrate new tools and capabilities into familiar frameworks." Park nodded, impressed by the thoughtfulness of her response. "That's a good way to think about it. Some pilots get overwhelmed by the technology and forget that it's still fundamentally about flying the aircraft safely and effectively." The brief conversation represented the first genuinely positive interaction Sarah had experienced with one of her fellow pilots beyond basic professional courtesy. Park's willingness to engage with her on substantive training issues suggested that not everyone in the group had written her off based on her background. However, Morrison had overheard the exchange and interpreted it differently. From his perspective, Sarah's tendency to speak in general principles rather than citing specific operational experience continued to suggest that she was covering for gaps in her background. A pilot with extensive fighter experience would more likely discuss specific examples or make comparisons to previous aircraft they had flown. As the second week concluded, the group dynamics had settled into a stable pattern where Sarah was accepted as a legitimate member of the training class, but remained somewhat isolated from the informal social networks that had developed among pilots with similar backgrounds and experiences. She participated in group discussions when invited, performed adequately during training exercises, and maintained professional relationships with everyone, but she hadn't achieved the kind of peer acceptance that would indicate full integration into the group. The real test would come during the third week, when pilots would begin actual F-35 flight operations under instructor supervision. Simulator performance provided useful indicators of aptitude and learning ability, but actual aircraft operations would reveal who possessed the kind of instinctive piloting skills and situational awareness that couldn't be taught through academic instruction or simulated experiences. Sarah knew that strong performance during her first actual F-35 flights would be crucial for establishing her credibility within the group and proving that her unconventional background hadn't left her unprepared for the program's demands. Pressure was significant, but it was also an opportunity to demonstrate that competence could emerge from unexpected places and that assumptions based on career paths could be misleading. The morning of her first scheduled F-35 flight, Sarah arrived at the squadron operations building earlier than necessary, wanting extra time to review procedures and prepare mentally for the experience of actually flying the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. The transition from simulation to actual flight operations was always significant, but the stakes felt particularly high given the scrutiny surrounding her presence in the program. As she reviewed her flight plan and weather briefing, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path hadn't been conventional, and it had required sacrifices and choices that weren't immediately apparent to outside observers. But every decision had been made with the long-term goal of becoming the best possible pilot and aviation professional, even when that meant accepting assignments that seemed less prestigious or exciting than alternatives. The skepticism she faced from her fellow pilots was understandable and not entirely unreasonable given the limited information they had about her background and qualifications. Military aviation was an unforgiving environment where incompetence could have catastrophic consequences, and pilots had legitimate reasons to be concerned about the preparation and readiness of their colleagues. What they couldn't know, and what she had chosen not to advertise, was that her unconventional path had provided unique advantages and perspectives that would prove valuable in ways they couldn't anticipate. The challenge was demonstrating those advantages through performance rather than explanations, proving through actions rather than words that excellence could emerge from unexpected backgrounds and non-traditional career trajectories. The third week would begin the real test of whether Sarah Chen belonged among America's elite fighter pilots, and the outcome would depend not just on her flying skills, but on her ability to perform under the additional pressure of proving herself to skeptical peers who had already formed preliminary judgments about her capabilities and potential. The morning of Sarah's first F-35 flight arrived with the kind of crystal-clear desert sky that made Nellis Air Force Base a premier location for advanced aviation training. She completed her pre-flight briefing with instructor pilot Major Tom Sullivan, a veteran F-35 pilot whose calm demeanor and methodical approach to instruction had earned him a reputation as one of the program's most effective teachers. Sullivan had reviewed Sarah's simulator performance and academic progress with interest. Her scores placed her solidly in the middle of the class rankings, showing steady improvement and consistent effort without the dramatic peaks or valleys that sometimes characterized pilots struggling with the transition to advanced aircraft. What impressed him most was her systematic approach to learning and her willingness to ask questions when concepts weren't immediately clear. Today's flight will focus on basic aircraft handling and systems familiarization, Sullivan explained. As they walked toward the flight line, the F-35 handles differently from anything you've flown before. The fly-by-wire system provides stability and control that can feel almost artificial at first, but it's designed to let you focus on tactical employment rather than fighting the aircraft. Sarah nodded, absorbing every detail of the briefing. Around them, other pilots were conducting their own pre-flight preparations, the morning air filled with the purposeful activity of a professional aviation unit preparing for training operations. She could feel eyes on her as she and Sullivan approached her assigned aircraft, knowing that her performance during this first flight would be closely observed and discussed among her classmates. The F-35 sat on the ramp like a technological marvel waiting to reveal its secrets. Up close, the aircraft's stealth design was even more impressive, featuring angular surfaces and carefully crafted lines that would render it nearly invisible to enemy radar systems. Every aspect of the aircraft reflected decades of advanced research and engineering, from its sophisticated sensor packages to its revolutionary engine design. As Sarah began her pre-flight inspection, she moved with methodical precision around the aircraft, checking each critical component with the focused attention that characterized professional aviators. Her movements were confident and purposeful, reflecting her understanding that thorough pre-flight procedures weren't about passing tests, but about ensuring safe and effective flight operations. Major Sullivan observed her inspection routine with professional interest. The way a pilot conducted pre-flight procedures often revealed important information about their attention to detail, technical knowledge, and overall approach to aviation safety. Sarah's inspection was comprehensive and systematic, demonstrating familiarity with aircraft systems and proper inspection techniques. Any questions about the aircraft configuration or mission profile? Sullivan asked as Sarah completed her external inspection. The sensor fusion display integration during startup, Sarah replied thoughtfully. I want to make sure I understand the proper sequence for bringing the systems online, without creating conflicts between different data sources. Sullivan raised an eyebrow slightly, surprised by the technical sophistication of her question. Most pilots on their first F-35 flight were more concerned with basic aircraft handling than advanced sensor integration protocols. Her focus on systems management suggested a deeper understanding of the aircraft's capabilities than he had expected. Good question, he replied approvingly. The startup sequence is designed to prevent exactly those kinds of conflicts, but understanding the logic behind the procedures will help you troubleshoot if something doesn't go according to plan. As they climbed into their respective cockpits, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and focused concentration that came with flying a new aircraft for the first time. The F-35's cockpit was a marvel of technological integration, featuring large multifunction displays that could be configured for different mission requirements and an advanced helmet-mounted display system that would project critical information directly into her field of vision. The startup procedures were complex but logical, requiring coordination between multiple systems while maintaining awareness of aircraft status and environmental conditions. Sarah worked through each step methodically, cross-checking her actions with cockpit displays and maintaining radio communication with Sullivan and ground control personnel. Morrison, who had completed his own flight earlier in the week, watched from the squadron operations building as Sarah's aircraft taxied toward the runway. His first F-35 flight had gone well, building on his extensive experience with high-performance aircraft to demonstrate quick adaptation to the new platform. He had received positive feedback from his instructor and felt confident about his progress in the program. Observing Sarah's taxi procedures, Morrison noted that her aircraft handling appeared smooth and controlled, suggesting adequate preparation for basic flight operations. However, he remained skeptical about how she would perform once airborne, particularly if unexpected situations arose that required quick thinking and decisive action based on operational experience. Think she'll struggle once they get to tactical scenarios? Rodriguez asked, joining Morrison at the observation window. Hard to say, Morrison replied diplomatically. Basic flying skills aren't really the issue. The question is whether she can handle the cognitive load when things get complicated. Their conversation was interrupted as Sarah's aircraft lifted off from Nellis's main runway, climbing smoothly into the Nevada desert sky. Even from a distance, the F-35's unique design was apparent, its angular profile cutting through the air with the purposeful efficiency that characterized modern stealth technology. In the cockpit, Sarah was experiencing the F-35's flight characteristics for the first time, marveling at the smooth power delivery and responsive control inputs that made the aircraft feel almost effortless to fly. The fly-by-wire system translated her control inputs into optimal aircraft responses, providing stability and predictability that allowed her to focus on other aspects of flight operations. How does she feel? Sullivan's voice came through the intercom system. Incredibly smooth, Sarah replied, executing a gentle turn to test the aircraft's responsiveness. The control integration is remarkable. It's like the aircraft anticipates what you want to do. Sullivan smiled, recognizing the reaction that most pilots had when first experiencing the F-35's advanced flight control systems. The aircraft was designed to be intuitive and forgiving, allowing pilots to concentrate on tactical employment rather than fighting basic aircraft handling challenges. Let's run through some basic maneuvers, Sullivan instructed. Start with some steep turns, then we'll progress to climbs and descents to get you comfortable with the power settings and energy management. Sarah began working through the prescribed exercises, feeling increasingly comfortable with the aircraft's responses and control characteristics. The F-35 was unlike anything she had flown before, but the fundamental principles of aviation still applied. It was simply a matter of learning to integrate new capabilities into familiar frameworks. During a climbing turn, Sarah noticed something unexpected in her peripheral vision. A small aircraft, possibly a civilian general aviation plane, appeared to be operating in restricted airspace near their training area. The contact wasn't showing up on her radar display, which was concerning given the sophisticated sensor capabilities of the F-35. Major Sullivan. I'm seeing a visual contact at 2 o'clock low, approximately 5 miles, she reported calmly. It's not appearing on my radar display. Sullivan looked in the indicated direction and spotted the aircraft Sarah had identified. He was impressed that she had noticed the contact so quickly while managing her first F-35 flight, demonstrating the kind of situational awareness that was essential for safe flight operations. Good eye, Sullivan replied. That's probably a civilian aircraft that wandered into restricted airspace. Let's contact range control and see if they're tracking it. The incident was resolved quickly, with range control personnel confirming that the civilian aircraft had indeed strayed into restricted airspace and directing it to leave the area immediately. For Sarah, the episode represented a successful demonstration of her ability to maintain situational awareness while managing multiple tasks simultaneously. Back at the squadron operations building, the air traffic control personnel had noted Sarah's quick identification of the airspace violation and professional handling of the situation. Word began spreading among the ground personnel that the new pilot had demonstrated impressive awareness during her first F-35 flight. However, Morrison and Rodriguez, who had heard about the incident through radio monitoring, interpreted it differently. From their perspective, Sarah's quick spotting of the civilian aircraft might have been lucky rather than skillful, and her unfamiliarity with F-35 sensor systems might have contributed to her inability to detect the contact electronically before seeing it visually. "At least she's paying attention to what's going on around her," Rodriguez commented diplomatically. "Basic airmanship," Morrison replied dismissively. "Any competent pilot should be maintaining visual scanning while learning new systems." Their assessment wasn't entirely unfair, but it reflected their tendency to view Sarah's performance through a lens of skepticism, rather than giving her credit for demonstrating exactly the kind of skills that were essential for safe and effective flight operations. As the flight progressed, Sarah and Sullivan worked through increasingly complex exercises designed to familiarize her with the F-35's handling characteristics across different flight regimes. The aircraft performed flawlessly, demonstrating the reliability and capabilities that had made it the cornerstone of modern air combat strategy. "Let's try some simulated air-to-air intercept procedures," Sullivan suggested. "I'll play the role of a target aircraft, and you can practice using the radar and sensor systems to acquire and track contacts." The exercise introduced Sarah to the F-35's advanced sensor fusion capabilities, which combined information from multiple sources to provide comprehensive situational awareness that surpassed anything available in previous generation aircraft. Learning to interpret and act on this wealth of information would be crucial for effective tactical employment. Sarah approached the intercept exercise methodically, working through the sensor management procedures while maintaining aircraft control and radio communication. The cognitive load was significant, requiring her to process information from multiple sources while executing tactical maneuvers and adhering to training protocols. "Contact bearing 090, range 15 miles, altitude unknown," Sarah reported as her radar detected Sullivan's aircraft during the simulated intercept scenario. "Good acquisition," Sullivan replied. "Now let's see how you handle the intercept geometry while managing your sensor picture." The exercise continued with Sarah demonstrating steady improvement in her ability to coordinate multiple tasks while maintaining tactical awareness. Her performance wasn't exceptional, but it was competent and showed the kind of systematic progress that characterized successful students. After landing and completing post-flight procedures, Sarah and Sullivan conducted a thorough debrief of the training flight. Sullivan's assessment was generally positive, noting her professional approach to learning and her ability to maintain situational awareness while adapting to new systems. "Overall, a solid first flight," Sullivan concluded. "You demonstrated good basic airmanship and showed appropriate caution when dealing with unfamiliar systems. The key going forward will be building confidence and speed in your decision-making processes." Sarah nodded, satisfied with the feedback, but aware that she would need to continue improving to meet the program's demanding standards. Her first F-35 flight had been successful, but it represented just the beginning of a challenging learning process that would test every aspect of her aviation knowledge and skills. During the evening debrief session, pilots shared their experiences and discussed lessons learned from their individual training flights. The atmosphere was professional but competitive, with each pilot eager to demonstrate their progress and understanding of the F-35's capabilities. "The sensor fusion takes some getting used to," Park commented during the group discussion. "You have so much information available that the challenge becomes filtering out what's most important for the tactical situation. That's where operational experience really matters," Morrison added, directing his comment toward the group, but with an implicit reference to pilots whose backgrounds might not have prepared them for such information-rich environments. "You need to develop instincts about what information is actionable and what's just noise." Sarah understood the implication, but chose not to respond defensively. Instead, she contributed to the discussion by asking thoughtful questions about sensor management techniques and tactical decision-making processes. Her approach demonstrated genuine interest in learning rather than defensiveness about her background. Foster, who had been observing the group dynamics, began to notice that Sarah's questions often revealed deeper thinking about aviation concepts than her limited experience might suggest. Her inquiries weren't just about procedures, but about underlying principles and strategic considerations that showed sophisticated understanding of air combat operations. "That's an interesting point about sensor prioritization," Foster said in response to one of Sarah's questions. "Have you given much thought to how different threat environments might affect your information management strategies?" "Every environment presents unique challenges," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "The key is developing flexible frameworks that can adapt to changing tactical situations rather than relying on rigid procedures that might not apply in unexpected circumstances." The response demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking that characterized successful fighter pilots, and Foster found himself reassessing his initial assumptions about Sarah's preparation level. Her ability to think strategically about complex operational concepts suggested that her background might have provided better preparation than was immediately apparent. Morrison overheard the exchange but interpreted it differently. From his perspective, Sarah's tendency to speak in general principles rather than citing specific operational examples continued to suggest that she was compensating for limited practical experience with theoretical knowledge. As the program entered its fourth week, the training intensity increased significantly. Pilots began flying more complex missions that integrated multiple F-35 capabilities while operating in realistic tactical scenarios. These exercises would test not just individual flying skills, but each pilot's ability to function effectively as part of integrated air operations. Sarah's second F-35 flight involved a simulated close air support mission where she would need to coordinate with ground forces while managing weapon systems and maintaining awareness of potential threats. The exercise was designed to challenge pilots' ability to process multiple information streams while making time-critical decisions under pressure. The mission briefing was comprehensive, covering threat analysis, target identification procedures, and coordination protocols with simulated ground forces. Sarah listened carefully to every detail, taking notes and asking clarifying questions when mission parameters weren't completely clear. "Remember that close air support is fundamentally about supporting ground forces," the briefing officer emphasized. "Your primary responsibility is ensuring that your actions contribute to ground force objectives while minimizing risk to friendly personnel." As Sarah prepared for the mission, she reflected on the complexity of modern air operations and the level of coordination required between different military units. The F-35's advanced capabilities were designed to enhance this coordination, but success still depended on pilot judgment and decision-making skills. The flight itself proved challenging, requiring Sarah to manage weapon systems, communicate with multiple agencies, and maintain tactical awareness while executing precision maneuvers in simulated combat conditions. The cognitive load was substantial, testing her ability to prioritize tasks and make quick decisions based on rapidly changing tactical situations. During one phase of the exercise, Sarah encountered a simulated surface-to-air missile threat that required immediate evasive action while maintaining her attack profile against designated targets. The scenario tested her ability to balance competing priorities under pressure, demonstrating the kind of split-second decision-making that characterized combat operations. Sarah's response was immediate and tactically sound. She executed appropriate, evasive maneuvers while maintaining situational awareness and continuing to coordinate with simulated ground forces. Her actions demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and crisis management skills that the exercise was designed to evaluate. "Excellent threat reaction," her instructor pilot commented. "You maintained mission focus while responding." appropriately to the immediate danger. That's exactly the kind of judgment we need to see. The positive feedback was gratifying, but Sarah remained focused on learning rather than celebrating individual successes. Each training flight presented new challenges and opportunities to improve her understanding of F-35 capabilities and tactical employment concepts. After landing, Sarah's instructor provided a comprehensive debrief that highlighted both strengths and areas for continued improvement. Her performance had been strong overall, demonstrating steady progress in her ability to integrate multiple F-35 systems while maintaining tactical effectiveness. "You're developing good tactical instincts," the instructor observed. "The key going forward will be building speed and confidence in your decision-making processes. Combat operations don't allow time for extended deliberation." During the evening academic session, pilots studied advanced F-35 employment tactics and integration procedures with other aircraft and ground systems. The material was dense and technically challenging, requiring deep understanding of complex operational concepts and strategic frameworks. Sarah approached the academic training with the same methodical focus she brought to flight operations, but her educational background in aeronautical engineering and computer science provided significant advantages in understanding the technical aspects of sensor fusion and systems integration. When the instructor discussed the mathematical principles underlying radar cross-section reduction and stealth technology, Sarah found herself on familiar ground. Her engineering education had included extensive coursework in electromagnetic theory and signal processing that directly applied to understanding how stealth aircraft achieved their low observable characteristics. The relationship between aircraft geometry and radar return signatures is fundamentally about wave physics, Sarah commented during a class discussion. Understanding the mathematical principles helps explain why certain design features are necessary for effective stealth performance. The comment demonstrated exactly the kind of deep technical knowledge that characterized the most effective F-35 pilots, and several of her classmates took notice. Park, in particular, was impressed by Sarah's ability to explain complex technical concepts in clear, understandable terms. "That's a good way to think about it," Park replied. "Most pilots just accept that stealth works without understanding the underlying physics. Having that deeper knowledge probably helps with tactical employment decisions." Morrison overheard the exchange but remained skeptical. While he acknowledged that Sarah clearly had strong technical knowledge, he continued to question whether theoretical understanding could substitute for practical operational experience when situations became genuinely challenging. The program's fifth week introduced night flying operations, which represented a significant increase in complexity and difficulty. Operating the F-35 at night required mastery of advanced sensor systems and helmet-mounted displays while maintaining aircraft control in reduced visibility conditions. Sarah's first night flight was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, with takeoff planned shortly after sunset to take advantage of optimal lighting conditions for initial familiarization with night operations. The mission would involve basic aircraft handling in darkness followed by simple navigation exercises using the F-35's advanced sensor packages. As she prepared for the night flight, Sarah reviewed procedures for operating the helmet-mounted display system that would be crucial for maintaining situational awareness in dark conditions. The technology was remarkable, projecting critical flight information directly into her field of vision while allowing her to maintain visual contact with the external environment. The night flying experience proved both challenging and exhilarating. Operating the F-35 in darkness required a fundamental shift in thinking about aircraft control and navigation, relying heavily on instrument displays and sensor information, rather than visual references that were available during daylight operations. Sarah adapted quickly to the night flying environment, demonstrating comfortable proficiency with the helmet-mounted display system and advanced navigation capabilities. Her systematic approach to learning served her well in the more challenging conditions, allowing her to build confidence gradually while maintaining safety margins. "How are you finding the night operations?" her instructor asked during a brief break in the training exercise. "Different from anything I've experienced before," Sarah replied honestly. "The sensor integration makes it almost like flying in a completely virtual environment. It takes some adjustment to trust the technology rather than relying on visual cues." The instructor nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right mindset." Night operations in the F-35 are fundamentally about learning to use technology effectively, while maintaining awareness of your limitations and backup options. As the night flight progressed, Sarah encountered her first significant challenge of the training program. During a routine navigation exercise, her primary navigation system experienced a simulated failure that required immediate troubleshooting and activation of backup systems while maintaining aircraft control in darkness. The scenario was designed to test pilot responses to equipment failures under challenging conditions, evaluating both technical knowledge and crisis management skills. Sarah's response would be closely observed and would contribute significantly to her overall program. Evaluation. When the navigation failure occurred, Sarah's reaction was immediate and systematic. She recognized the failure indication, activated backup navigation systems, and maintained aircraft control while troubleshooting the problem according to established procedures. Her actions demonstrated exactly the kind of competent crisis management that characterized professional aviators. Navigation system failure, activating backup GPS. Sarah reported calmly to her instructor. Maintaining current heading while establishing alternate navigation solution. The instructor was impressed by Sarah's composed response to the simulated emergency. Her actions had been textbook perfect, demonstrating both technical knowledge and the kind of calm decision-making that was essential for safe flight operations under adverse conditions. "Excellent emergency response," the instructor commented. "You maintained aircraft control, followed proper procedures, and kept me informed of your actions. That's exactly what we need to see during crisis situations." Word of Sarah's strong performance during the night flying exercise began circulating among the instructor staff, who compared notes on student progress during their regular evaluation meetings. Her consistent improvement and professional approach to training had begun earning recognition from the experienced pilots responsible for program instruction. However, among her fellow students, reactions to Sarah's progress were mixed. Some pilots, like Park and Foster, were beginning to recognize that her competence exceeded their initial expectations and were developing genuine respect for her abilities and knowledge. Morrison and Rodriguez remained more skeptical, interpreting Sarah's steady performance as adequate but not exceptional. From their perspective, she was meeting minimum standards without demonstrating the kind of natural flying ability that characterized pilots destined for elite assignments. "She's doing fine," Rodriguez commented during an informal discussion among the students. "But fine isn't really the standard for F-35 operations. This aircraft requires pilots who can excel under pressure, not just meet basic requirements." Morrison nodded in agreement. "The real test will come when we start flying more complex tactical scenarios. That's where operational experience really matters, and where the gaps in her background might become more apparent." Their assessment wasn't entirely unreasonable, but it reflected a tendency to view Sarah's performance through a lens of predetermined skepticism, rather than recognizing her actual achievements and steady improvement throughout the program. As the program entered its 6th week, pilots began preparing for more advanced tactical exercises that would integrate F-35 capabilities with other aircraft and simulated ground forces. These missions would represent the closest approximation to actual combat operations that the training program could provide within safety and security constraints. Sarah approached the advanced tactical training with focused determination. knowing that strong performance during these complex exercises would be crucial for establishing her credibility within the pilot community and proving her readiness for operational assignments after program completion. The tactical exercises would test every aspect of pilot training, from basic aircraft handling to advanced sensor management, weapon systems employment, and coordination with other military units. Success would require not just individual competence, but the ability to function effectively as part of integrated military operations. During the mission briefing for her first advanced tactical exercise, Sarah listened carefully as instructors outlined a complex scenario involving multiple aircraft, simulated enemy threats, and coordination with ground forces operating in contested territory. The exercise would test pilot decision-making under realistic combat conditions while maintaining safety standards appropriate for training operations. Remember that tactical success depends on teamwork and communication, the briefing officer emphasized. Individual flying skills are important, but mission success requires effective coordination with other aircraft and ground units. Your job is to contribute to overall mission objectives while maintaining your assigned responsibilities. As Sarah prepared for the tactical exercise, she reflected on her journey through the F-35 training program and the challenges she had overcome to reach this point. The skepticism from some of her fellow pilots had been frustrating, but not unexpected, and she had chosen to respond through consistent performance rather than defensive arguments about her qualifications. The advanced tactical exercise would provide an opportunity to demonstrate that competence could emerge from unconventional backgrounds and that excellence in military aviation wasn't limited to pilots who followed traditional career paths. Sarah was ready to prove that she belonged among America's elite fighter pilots, regardless of what assumptions others might have made about her preparation and potential. The morning of the tactical exercise dawned clear and calm, with perfect weather conditions for the complex training mission ahead. Sarah completed her pre-flight procedures with extra care, knowing that the exercise would be observed closely by instructors and fellow students, who would evaluate her performance against the demanding standards expected of operational F-35 pilots. As she strapped into the cockpit of her F-35, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and focused concentration that came with challenging aviation operations. The aircraft around her represented the culmination of decades of technological development and strategic planning, and she was privileged to be among the select few pilots entrusted with mastering its capabilities. The tactical exercise was about to begin, and Sarah Chen was ready to show that assumptions about background and preparation could be misleading indicators of pilot potential. The real test of her abilities was finally at hand. The advanced tactical exercise began at 0800 hours with 4 F-35s. Launching in formation from Nellis Air Force Base, Sarah flew as the number 3 aircraft in a flight led by Morrison, whose recent strong performance had earned him the flight leader position for this complex training mission. The exercise scenario involved a simulated strike against high-value targets in heavily defended territory, requiring precise coordination and tactical awareness from every pilot involved. As the formation climbed to their assigned altitude and headed toward the training area, Sarah focused on maintaining proper position while monitoring her advanced sensor displays for indications of simulated enemy activity. The F-35's sensor fusion capabilities provided unprecedented situational awareness, but interpreting and acting on that information under tactical conditions required experience and judgment that couldn't be taught through academic instruction alone. Viper flight, contact bearing 270, range 40 miles, multiple aircraft, Morrison announced over the radio as his sensors detected the simulated enemy formation that would oppose their mission. Maintain formation and prepare for tactical spread on my command. Sarah acknowledged the contact report while cross-checking her own sensor displays to verify the threat information. The F-35's advanced radar and electronic warfare systems provided detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions, but translating that information into effective tactical decisions remained a fundamentally human responsibility. The exercise progressed smoothly initially, with the four-ship formation maneuvering to avoid simulated surface-to-air missile threats while approaching their assigned target area. Sarah maintained her position in the formation, while contributing to the overall tactical picture through sensor sharing and communication with other aircraft. During the approach to the target area, the exercise controllers introduced additional complications designed to test pilot decision-making under pressure. Simulated electronic jamming began affecting communication systems. Weather conditions deteriorated rapidly, and additional enemy aircraft appeared on radar displays as the tactical situation became increasingly complex. Sarah adapted to the changing conditions with calm professionalism, adjusting her communication procedures to compensate for electronic interference, while maintaining awareness of both friendly and enemy aircraft positions. Her responses demonstrated exactly the kind of flexible thinking that characterized effective combat pilots. Viper 3, good adaptation to the jamming environment, Morrison commented over a brief clear radio transmission. Maintain your current position and be ready to adjust based on threat development. The acknowledgement represented the first genuinely positive feedback Sarah had received from Morrison during their time in the training program, and it came at a moment when her performance was being tested under the most challenging conditions the program could provide within safety constraints. As the formation continued toward the target area, Sarah noticed something unusual in her sensor displays that hadn't been briefed as part of the exercise scenario. A contact was appearing intermittently on her radar at a range and altitude that suggested it might be an actual aircraft rather than a simulated threat generated by the training system. The contact wasn't displaying the electronic identification signals that characterized either friendly aircraft or training equipment, and its flight path seemed inconsistent with any planned exercise activity. Sarah's engineering background had taught her to pay attention to anomalies and unexpected data patterns, and this contact definitely qualified as unusual. Viper lead, Viper 3 has an intermittent contact bearing 090, range 25 miles, altitude approximately flight level 300, Sarah reported professionally. Contact is not correlating with any briefed exercise activity. Morrison checked his own displays, but couldn't immediately locate the contact Sarah had reported. The intermittent nature of the signal made it difficult to verify, and the complexity of the ongoing exercise meant that multiple radar returns and electronic signals were creating a cluttered tactical environment. Viper 3, can you maintain track on that contact? Morrison asked. I'm not seeing it on my displays. Sarah continued monitoring the anomalous contact while maintaining her responsibilities within the formation and exercise scenario. Her ability to track multiple information sources simultaneously was being tested to its limits, but she remained focused on both immediate tactical requirements and the potentially significant contact that others hadn't detected. Contact is intermittent but appears to be maintaining a steady heading toward our operating area, Sarah reported. Recommend we query range control about any unscheduled traffic in the vicinity. The suggestion was tactically sound and demonstrated appropriate concern for flight safety, but it also highlighted Sarah's tendency to notice details that others might miss. Her systematic approach to information processing and willingness to report anomalies reflected exactly the kind of thorough professionalism that characterized elite military aviators. Morrison contacted the exercise controllers to inquire about the contact Sarah had reported, but their initial response indicated no awareness of unscheduled aircraft in the training area. The exercise continued according to plan while controllers investigated the reported contact through coordination with air traffic control agencies. As the formation approached the simulated target area, the tactical scenario reached its climax with multiple threats appearing simultaneously. While pilots attempted to execute their assigned mission objectives, Sarah managed her weapon systems and sensor displays while maintaining formation position and monitoring the anomalous contact that continued to appear intermittently on her radar. During the weapon employment phase of the exercise, Sarah demonstrated smooth coordination of multiple F-35 systems while engaging simulated ground targets. Her performance was technically proficient and tactically appropriate, showing continued improvement in her ability to manage complex operations under pressure. Good weapons employment, Viper 3, her instructor pilot radioed from the monitoring aircraft. You maintain tactical awareness while executing your attack profile effectively. The positive feedback was gratifying, but Sarah remained concerned about the unidentified contact that had been appearing on her radar throughout the exercise. As the formation began its post-mission procedures and prepared to return to base, she continued monitoring for any indication of the anomalous aircraft. Viper 3, I'm still tracking that intermittent contact, Sarah reported to Morrison. It appears to be converging on our return route to base. This time, Morrison was able to correlate Sarah's report with his own sensor displays, confirming the presence of an unidentified aircraft that hadn't been part of the exercise planning. The contact's behavior was unusual enough to warrant immediate attention from exercise controllers and air traffic management personnel. Range control, Viper lead has an unidentified contact that appears to be operating in restricted airspace, Morrison reported to the exercise controllers. Request immediate coordination with approach control to identify this traffic. The response from range control was swift and concerning. No scheduled aircraft were supposed to be operating in the area, and the contact Sarah had first detected was indeed an unknown aircraft that had somehow entered the restricted training airspace without proper coordination or authorization. Within minutes, the training exercise was suspended as air traffic controllers and military personnel worked to identify the intruding aircraft and ensure the safety of all participants. Sarah's early detection and persistent monitoring of the anomalous contact had potentially prevented a serious airspace violation that could have resulted in dangerous proximity between military and civilian aircraft. Viper flight, exercise terminated, return to base immediately, came the instruction from range control. Well done on the early contact detection. That situation could have become much more serious without your vigilance. As the formation returned to Nellis Air Force Base, Morrison found himself reassessing his opinions about Sarah's capabilities and contribution to flight safety. Her detection of the unidentified aircraft had demonstrated exactly the kind of situational awareness and attention to detail that characterized exceptional pilots. Good catch on that contact, Sarah, Morrison said over the radio, using her first name for the first time since the program began. Your persistence in tracking that anomaly probably prevented a serious safety issue. The acknowledgement represented a significant shift in Morrison's attitude toward Sarah, moving from skeptical tolerance to genuine respect for her professional competence. Her performance during the tactical exercise had been solid, but her detection of the airspace violation had demonstrated capabilities that went beyond basic flight training requirements. After landing and completing post-flight procedures, the pilots gathered for a comprehensive debrief that focused as much on the airspace violation as on the planned exercise objectives. Sarah's role in detecting and tracking the unidentified aircraft became a central topic of discussion among both instructors and students. The early detection of that contact was exactly the kind of vigilance we need from F-35 pilots, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes commented during the debrief. Captain Chen's persistent monitoring and reporting potentially prevented a dangerous situation that could have compromised both training safety and national security. The formal recognition from the program director carried significant weight. Within the pilot community, establishing Sarah's contribution as genuinely valuable rather than merely adequate. Her systematic approach to sensor monitoring and willingness to report anomalies had proven itself under real-world conditions. Foster, who had been gradually developing respect for Sarah's competence throughout the program, approached her after the debrief with genuine admiration. "That was impressive work tracking that contact," he said sincerely. "Most pilots would have dismissed an intermittent return as system noise, but you stayed with it and potentially prevented a serious incident." The conversation marked a turning point in how several of Sarah's classmates viewed her contributions to the program. Her performance during the tactical exercise had been competent, but her detection of the airspace violation had demonstrated exceptional situational awareness that couldn't be dismissed as luck or coincidence. Rodriguez, who had remained skeptical throughout most of the program, found herself reconsidering her initial assessment of Sarah's capabilities. The incident had highlighted qualities that weren't immediately apparent from basic flight performance but were crucial for effective military aviation operations. "I have to admit, I didn't expect that level of sensor vigilance from someone with a training background," Rodriguez confided to Park during a private conversation. "That kind of attention to detail suggests there might be more to her preparation than we initially realized." The program's final weeks involved increasingly complex scenarios designed to test every aspect of pilot training and preparation for operational assignments. Sarah's performance continued to improve steadily, but the airspace violation incident had established her reputation as someone who contributed meaningfully to overall mission safety and effectiveness. During academic sessions, Sarah's questions and comments began receiving more serious consideration from both instructors and fellow students. Her engineering background provided unique insights into F-35 systems and capabilities that enhanced group discussions and learning opportunities for everyone involved. The sensor fusion algorithms are designed to eliminate false returns and correlation errors, Sarah explained during a technical discussion about radar performance. Understanding the mathematical principles behind the processing helps explain why certain contacts might appear intermittent or difficult to track consistently. Her ability to explain complex technical concepts in clear terms had begun earning recognition as a valuable teaching resource within the class. Pilots who had initially dismissed her unconventional background were starting to appreciate the depth of knowledge she brought to discussions about aircraft systems and employment tactics. The program's culminating exercise was scheduled for the final week, involving a complex multi-day scenario that would test every aspect of pilot training under conditions that closely approximated actual combat operations. Sarah approached the final exercise with confidence earned through consistent performance and growing recognition from both instructors and classmates. However, the most dramatic test of her abilities was yet to come. On a Tuesday morning during the final week of training, Sarah was scheduled for a routine proficiency flight designed to demonstrate her mastery of F-35 systems and tactical employment. The weather forecast called for clear skies and unlimited visibility, perfect conditions for the comprehensive evaluation that would contribute significantly to her overall program assessment. As Sarah completed her pre-flight briefing and prepared for what should have been a straightforward demonstration flight, meteorologists at Nellis began tracking an unexpected weather development that would transform her routine training mission into a genuine emergency requiring every skill she had developed throughout her aviation career. A massive dust storm, driven by unusual wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, was developing rapidly in the desert southwest of Las Vegas and moving directly toward Nellis Air Force Base. The storm's intensity and speed of development had caught weather forecasters by surprise, creating conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Sarah launched from Nellis, unaware of the approaching weather emergency, beginning her proficiency demonstration with standard F-35 handling exercises and systems checks. The aircraft performed flawlessly, and her execution of prescribed maneuvers met all required standards for program completion. 20 minutes into the flight, while Sarah was conducting advanced sensor employment exercises at 15,000 feet above the Nevada desert, the first radio call came from Nellis Approach Control with information that would change everything. About her mission. All aircraft in the Nellis training areas, be advised we have rapidly developing severe weather conditions approaching the field. Visibility is deteriorating quickly due to an intense dust storm. All training flights should consider immediate return to base. Sarah acknowledged the weather advisory while checking her current position and fuel status. She had sufficient fuel for an immediate return to base, and the weather conditions at her current location remained clear with unlimited visibility. The logical course of action was to terminate her training exercises and return to Nellis before conditions deteriorated further. However, as she began her descent toward the base, Sarah's F-35 sensors began detecting the leading edge of the approaching dust storm. The meteorological conditions were unlike anything she had encountered during her flight training, featuring wall-like formations of suspended dust and debris that reduced visibility to near zero over large areas. Nellis Approach, Viper 7 requests current field conditions and approach guidance. Sarah radioed as she continued her descent toward increasingly ominous-looking weather formations. The response from approach control was sobering. Viper 7, current field conditions are rapidly deteriorating. Visibility has dropped to less than 1/4 mile in blowing dust and sand. We may need to suspend flight operations until conditions improve. Sarah found herself facing a decision that would test every aspect of her training and judgment. She could attempt to land at Nellis under extremely challenging visibility conditions, divert to an alternate airfield that might have better weather, or remain airborne until the storm passed and conditions improved sufficiently for a safe approach. Each option carried significant risks and limitations. Nellis was her home base with familiar approaches and emergency equipment, but the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions made landing there increasingly dangerous. Alternate airfields might have better current conditions, but could also be affected by the storm's unpredictable movement, and Sarah's fuel quantity limited her options for extended flight time. Viper 7 recommend you consider diversion to Edwards Air Force Base, approach control suggested. Current weather there's reported as clear with unlimited visibility. Sarah checked her fuel status and calculated the distance to Edwards, determining that diversion was feasible but would leave minimal fuel reserve for approach and landing procedures. The recommendation was sound from a safety perspective, but it also represented the conservative choice that most pilots would make under similar circumstances. As Sarah considered her options, the weather situation at Nellis continued to deteriorate rapidly. Visibility dropped to virtually zero as the full intensity of the dust storm engulfed the base, creating conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots flying aircraft equipped with the most advanced approach systems. Nellis Approach, Viper 7 requests updated field conditions. Sarah radioed, still hoping that the weather might improve enough to allow a safe approach to her home base. Viper 7, field conditions are now below approach minimums with zero visibility and blowing dust. We strongly recommend diversion to an alternate airfield. All other aircraft have either landed or diverted due to the weather emergency. The recommendation was clear and sensible, but as Sarah began turning toward Edwards Air Force Base, her F-35's advanced sensor systems provided information that changed her assessment of the tactical situation. The dust storm was moving faster and covering a larger area than initial forecasts had predicted, and Edwards was likely to be affected by similar conditions within the next 30 minutes. More critically, Sarah's fuel calculations indicated that attempting to reach Edwards and then potentially having to divert again, if weather conditions deteriorated, there would leave her dangerously low on fuel with limited options for safe landing. Sights. The conservative choice was becoming increasingly risky as the storm's scope and intensity exceeded all predictions. Approach control. Viper 7 requests information about emergency approach capabilities. Sarah radioed, beginning to consider the possibility that attempting to land at Nellis under zero visibility conditions might actually be the safest available option. The response from approach control was immediate and concerned. Viper 7, we cannot recommend approach under current conditions. Visibility is absolutely zero with significant turbulence and wind shear reported. Emergency equipment is standing by, but conditions are beyond normal approach minimums. Sarah understood the implications clearly. Attempting to land under these conditions would require capabilities and judgment that went far beyond normal training requirements. She would need to rely entirely on instruments and F-35 sensor systems, while dealing with severe turbulence and unpredictable wind conditions that could make aircraft control extremely difficult. However, her analysis of fuel status, weather, trends, and available alternatives led to an unavoidable conclusion. The safest course of action was to attempt an immediate approach to Nellis using the F-35's advanced systems and her own training to overcome the visibility limitations and severe weather conditions. Nellis approach. Viper 7 is declaring a fuel emergency and requesting immediate approach clearance. Sarah announced, formally committing herself to the most challenging aviation operation of her career. The radio response came immediately from both approach control and the base emergency coordinator. Viper 7, understand you are declaring a fuel emergency. You are cleared for immediate approach to runway 21 left. Emergency equipment is standing by. Be advised that no other aircraft have attempted approach under current conditions. As Sarah began her approach to Nellis Air Force Base, flying entirely on instruments through zero visibility conditions with severe turbulence and unpredictable winds, every aspect of her training and experience would be tested under circumstances that few pilots ever face. The F-35's advanced systems provided unprecedented capabilities for flying in adverse conditions, but success would ultimately depend on pilot skill, judgment, and the kind of calm decision-making that characterized elite military aviators. Approach began at 5,000 feet above ground level as Sarah configured her F-35 for landing while monitoring multiple instrument displays and sensor inputs that would guide her through the dust storm to a safe landing. The aircraft's advanced flight control systems helped maintain stability in the severe turbulence, but the approach required constant attention and correction as wind conditions changed unpredictably. Viper 7, you are 5 miles from the runway, on course and on glide path, approach control reported, tracking Sarah's aircraft through ground-based radar, systems that could penetrate the dust storm more effectively than visual observation. Sarah acknowledged the position report, while making continuous adjustments to maintain proper approach parameters despite the challenging weather conditions. The F-35's helmet-mounted display system projected critical flight information directly into her field of vision, allowing her to maintain instrument references while monitoring for any visual cues that might become available as she descended toward the runway. At 2,000 feet above ground level, Sarah encountered the most severe turbulence of the approach, with wind shear conditions that threatened to push her aircraft off the proper flight path. Her responses were immediate and precise, using the F-35's advanced flight controls to maintain course and descent rate despite the violent atmospheric conditions. Viper 7, you are 2 miles from touchdown, slightly right of course, correct left 10 degrees, approach control advised, helping Sarah maintain proper alignment with the runway despite the complete lack of visual reference points. The final mile of the approach required Sarah's complete attention and skill as she flew through conditions that would have been impossible for previous generation aircraft. The F-35's Systems provided the technological capability for the approach, but her execution under these extreme circumstances demonstrated piloting abilities that went far beyond basic training requirements. Viper 7, you are 1 mile from touchdown, on course and on glide path. Runway lights are set to maximum intensity, but visibility remains 0. Sarah continued the approach, trusting her instruments and the F-35 systems while preparing for the critical moment when she would need to transition from instrument flight to visual landing references. In 0 visibility conditions, that transition might never come, requiring her to execute a completely instrument-guided landing that few pilots had ever attempted under actual emergency conditions. At 500 feet above the runway, Sarah caught her first glimpse of approach lights through the swirling dust and debris. The visual reference was intermittent and limited, but it provided crucial confirmation that her instrument approach was accurately aligned with the runway centerline. Viper 7 has approach lights in sight, Sarah reported, beginning the transition from pure instrument flight to the limited visual references available through the dust storm. The final moments of the approach required Sarah to balance limited visual cues with instrument information while maintaining aircraft control in severe turbulence and gusty wind conditions. Her landing was firm but controlled with the F-35, touching down safely on Nellis's main runway despite weather conditions that had grounded all other aircraft operations. Viper 7, outstanding job. Emergency equipment will escort you to parking. Approach control radioed, relief evident in the controller's voice. As Sarah taxied clear of the runway and shut down her F-35's engines, she reflected on the approach she had just completed. The emergency landing had required every aspect of her training and experience, testing her abilities under conditions that represented the absolute limits of safe aircraft operations. Within an hour, word of Sarah's emergency landing had spread throughout Nellis Air Force Base and beyond. The combination of 0 visibility conditions, severe weather, and successful emergency approach represented exactly the kind of exceptional piloting that characterized elite military aviators under genuine crisis conditions. Morrison, who had been monitoring the emergency from the Squadron Operations Center, approached Sarah after her post-flight debrief with an expression of genuine respect and admiration. "That was extraordinary flying," he said sincerely. "I've never seen anyone attempt an approach under those conditions, let alone execute it successfully." The acknowledgement represented a complete transformation in Morrison's assessment of Sarah's capabilities. Her performance during the emergency had demonstrated piloting skills and judgment that exceeded those of most experienced fighter pilots, proving that exceptional competence could emerge from unexpected backgrounds. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes conducted a formal debrief of the emergency approach, documenting Sarah's decision-making process and execution for use in future training programs. The incident would become a case study in crisis management and the effective use of advanced aircraft systems under extreme conditions. Captain Chen's performance during this emergency exemplifies everything we hope to develop in F-35 pilots, Hayes concluded in her written report. Her calm decision-making, technical competence, and exceptional flying skills under impossible conditions represent the highest standards of military aviation. The emergency landing had transformed Sarah's status within the F-35 program from a competent student to a recognized expert whose performance under crisis conditions had exceeded the capabilities demonstrated by any other pilot in the program. Her unconventional background was no longer a source of skepticism, but rather an indicator that excellence could emerge from unexpected places. During the program graduation ceremony the following week, Sarah received formal recognition for her emergency approach and landing, along with her standard F-35 pilot certification. The incident had become legendary within the F-35 community, representing the kind of exceptional airmanship that justified the enormous investment in advanced aircraft technology and pilot training. Morrison Rodriguez, and the other pilots who had initially questioned Sarah's qualifications were among the most enthusiastic in acknowledging her achievements. The emergency landing had provided undeniable proof that their initial assumptions had been wrong and that competence in military aviation couldn't be predicted based on conventional career indicators. Sarah's assignment following F-35 training was to an operational squadron at Nellis Air Force Base, where she would put her advanced training to use in real-world missions, protecting American interests around the globe. Her reputation as the pilot who had successfully landed an F-35 under zero visibility conditions preceded her, ensuring immediate respect and recognition within her new unit. The story of Sarah Chen's journey from skeptical acceptance to acknowledged expertise became a powerful reminder within the military aviation community that assumptions about background and preparation could be misleading indicators of pilot potential. Excellence, the incident demonstrated, could emerge from unexpected places and manifest itself under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Years later, when young pilots asked about the most impressive flying they had ever witnessed, veteran F-35 instructors would invariably tell the story of the emergency approach at Nellis Air Force Base when a quiet pilot with an unconventional background proved that true airmanship transcended preconceptions and that the most remarkable achievements often came from the most unlikely sources. The dust storm eventually passed, revealing clear skies over Nevada, but the impact of Sarah's emergency landing continued to influence how the military aviation community thought about pilot selection, training, and the recognition of exceptional competence regardless of its origins. Sometimes the most extraordinary demonstrations of skill come not from those who seem most prepared, but from those who possess the quiet confidence and proven ability to excel when circumstances demand nothing less than perfection. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.